We have first up, and as usual, what we try to do when we put these conferences together, we try to bring you information on mindfulness, information on movement, and information on nutrition. We feel like those three principles are a great foundation to start a worksite wellness program and even to contribute to your own personal wellness. You know, mindfulness addresses stress, chronic stress, and we know chronic stress is an issue, and it's definitely we're aware that it is a precursor to mental illness. We understand that most Americans aren't moving enough, so we want to get people moving more, and usually that is the issue, being sedentary when we're dealing with chronic conditions, and also nutrition. So we have three speakers here that are going to help us with that today. And without further ado, I want to bring to you, she is in the space today, Heidi Hanna, Dr. Heidi Hanna. Heidi is a New York Times best-selling author. She's written 7 books, and I'm gonna tell you about them when she gets done. I have 2 of them here with me. She spent 20 years researching the impact of stress on the brain and presenting mental fitness strategies across the globe. Is anybody in here not having problem with stress? If so, log out. If you don't have any issues with stress, you can go ahead and, no, I'm just playing, because I know we're all feeling chronic stress lately. Heidi has been an instructor at Harvard Extension, a fellow with the American Institute of Stress, and she's a certified humor professional, although she won't admit she's funny. So you can appreciate me, Heidi, my humor. I love to laugh.
And I appreciate your dancing too. Thank you.
And here's Heidi, everybody.
Hi, everyone. It's awesome to be here with you. Just a little heads up on videos and things. If you want to be on video, that's wonderful. I love seeing your faces. If you'd rather not, I am going to be showing some slides for a bit. So feel free to go off camera, do what you want to do, stand, as Rhonda mentioned. I am actually right now physically in Charlotte, where I did a presentation yesterday for a leadership team, and I will be flying back to San Diego, where I live, right after the session, actually. So I'm kind of on California time still, which means that my computer clock says it's 6 o'clock.
He's okay. He's not okay.
So
it also like
feeling a little bit early at the moment, and I see someone is off mute, but I can't.
If you look at like real quick.
There we go. So anyway, so yes, it's a little bit of an early morning, but I'm excited to be with all of you and kind of finish my week in this way. So I'm going to go ahead and start sharing my computer screen here so we can look at some slides. And we will get that going. Wonderful. Oh, and I still can see chat. I was afraid that would go away. So hopefully you guys can see the slides okay. We're going to spend about 40 minutes or so talking together. If you have a question at any point, please feel free to post that in chat. I'm going to kind of keep an eye on what's going on there, but I'll also take a couple of breaks as we go through so that I can make sure that I haven't missed any of your questions. Also, because we have a short period of time together this morning, I've already shared with Rhonda some resources for you. So she's going to send those out to you, including a handout and some links to my LinkedIn courses, which you can have access to for free. That's a great way to spread the message. So if you have family you want to share it with, or if you have people on your team you want to share it with, there are 4 different courses that cover topics like energy management, stress mastery, and dealing with overwhelm, which ironically came out in January of 2020, right as things were getting a little chaotic for all of us. So just a little bit of an overview of what I'm hoping to talk about. I always say it's a flexible overview because it may change a little bit as we go along, but I do want to teach just a little bit about basic brain information. And some of this may be things that you already know, or it might be new, but I think it helps us to have a framework really as to why we want to do the things that we're going to talk about doing to recharge. I'm also going to talk a little bit about what stress actually is. Of course, we all experience it, but it helps to have just a really simple, clear definition so that we can manage it. I'm going to teach a really quick brain recharge practice that you can do. And then, as I mentioned, I'm going to share a recharge toolkit. So my hope is that by the end of this time together, that you'll have at least one thing that you want to do a little bit better for yourself to manage stress, and maybe some ideas of things you can take back to the workplace as well. Also, just say as a side note, I know we've got educators here and people that work within the education system. I went to college originally to be a teacher, and I really, really, really admire those of you who are working in education. I think it's incredibly important and way too often underrated, underappreciated. So I just want to start by giving my gratitude to you all for the work that you do, and to really encourage you to keep in touch with me. My email address is right there from the very beginning, so you can reach out if you have any questions or want any additional resources. Okay, let's see. Let's go to the next slide. So when COVID started, and we're not going to talk a lot about that particular circumstance necessarily, but when it started, I noticed something really interesting within myself and with my clients as well. And I started doing a little bit of research on disaster recovery. And this is just a very basic disaster recovery curve. Typically, this is what we would look at with something like a natural disaster that might happen. So there's the impact that we experience of whatever the trauma is. But what we tend to notice is there's actually an increase in emotional energy. So there's kind of an emotional high right after a trauma that feels like a bit of a honeymoon phase. So we have the experience, we all want to help each other out. Communities get stronger because of that. There's some cohesion happening there. But just like anything, what goes up has to come down at some point. And so after that initial honeymoon effect, there tends to be this disillusionment, some triggering events as we work to rebuild and try to be resilient. And I think this is really interesting. You could probably look back on different things you've experienced. I think for me, the one that stands out the most is actually the experiences of 9/11. I was on an airplane actually when that happened. So I was trying to fly from Pittsburgh to Orlando, where I lived at the time, and ended up getting stuck in Chicago for about a week and a half. And I just remember how everyone really came together. I travel a lot for work. And this was the first time I saw people, perfect strangers, really gathering around meal times and having conversations about how to help each other get home. There was a lot of people from the East Coast trying to get home. And it was really this emotional experience of how much people from all these different backgrounds are really coming together and supporting each other. But of course, over time, that starts to wane a bit. And so we can think about this in the same way that we really think about the energy that we have, that we put a lot of energy into things and we get excited about things. It's very natural that that's going to start to come down at some point. We can't sustain a high energy level for long periods of time. Even Rhonda, who I believe is the real life Energizer Bunny, has to recharge and recover her energy, or it's not going to be sustainable. So what we noticed in actually doing the research and looking at the world's largest standardized database of brain research is that stress levels actually started to kind of naturally subside. So within the period of just a little over a year, we saw the increases, we saw spikes, but we also started to see dips and stress coming back down to close to pre-pandemic levels after that year and a half or so. But what's been really interesting to me, and I continue to look at this data point as well, is the post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. And this is not in a clinical population, by the way. This is a working population. So this is what we would consider kind of normative data, is that normal people, working in their normal jobs and their normal lives are experiencing a lot of post-traumatic stress disorder symptoms. I'm going to talk a little bit about what those actually look like, but you might think about that for yourself, things like fatigue, or it doesn't even have to be complete burnout, but just lacking the passion that you once had. And certainly in education, there's been so many changes and people were really required to pivot so quickly that we really haven't had an opportunity to recharge, recover, repair from all of that. I love the theme of this conference, reset and recharge, to really give ourselves an opportunity to think about what that means for us. And it's not just a one-time thing. It's not just, okay, I'm going to start meditating or I'm going to try to take a vacation, but how do we do that consistently enough that we can create the kind of oscillation that's really necessary for the human system? So that's what we're going to be talking about. One just mantra that I love, and this actually originally came from John Kabat-Zinn, who created the mindfulness stress management program, is that we can't stop the waves, but we can learn to surf. And living in San Diego, going through all of these challenges and changes, I found myself spending a lot of time actually looking at the ocean and thinking about this. You know, what happens when we try to fight the energy of what stress is actually trying to provide us? Because at the end of the day, stress is really just energy and information. And if we can mobilize it somehow, we can actually use it to fuel some sort of positive change, whether that's doing something different or just taking better care of ourselves. We wouldn't stress if we didn't care about whatever it is that we're experiencing stress about. So stress highlights for us what's important and then can give us guidance on what we want to do with that. And then that's really the key when it comes to mastering stress and not just trying to manage it. So Rhonda beat me to the punch on this one. I always like to have a gratitude moment in here and allow people to think about something that they feel grateful for. So I'm going to take this another level and invite you to actually feel the gratitude and see if you can really pay attention to what gratitude feels like. So if you're in a position where you can safely close your eyes, you might want to start by thinking about what you feel grateful for, and then actually trying to bring that down into your body and see if you notice anything. Sometimes we'll notice something in the space around our heart when we feel gratitude. And you can even put your hand on your heart to kind of anchor that feeling in, because we don't want to just keep things top of mind. A lot of times with like gratitude lists and journals, we write things down and we make note of them, but we don't actually soak it in and experience it. And it's that feeling and that experience that really gives us the chance to recharge our own energy. And we can do that with gratitude. We can do that with play, with fun, with humor. Humor is one of my favorite ways to do that. And I'm going to give us a chance to experience a little bit of that before we end our session today. So that might be something too that you think about. How could I add more kind of strategic, healthy humor in my day? And the more we look for those things, of course, the more we train our brain to be aware of those things. But just like with gratitude or mindfulness, we don't want to just keep it up here in the top of our head. We want to try to really embody the whole experience to get the most benefit. So to me, in the middle of these most challenging circumstances, there are so many opportunities to learn, to grow, to be a light to somebody. I love this saying, and I try to think about it a lot when I'm really going through something tough, and that is, in the darkest nights, the stars shine the brightest. So we have the opportunity with our energy to be a light for other people. But again, I want to say that it's not about doing that all the time, 24/7, or else that light is going to burn out. There's no way that we can sustain it. So it really comes back to this idea of oscillation. If there's one key word that you could take out of the presentation today, it would be that: oscillation. How can I get more oscillation? How can I get more of a healthy rhythm into my day so that every day starts to have a little bit more of that feel where I am recharging? So what is stress? I know we all know when we're experiencing stress, but I want to invite you to go ahead and type in the chat box if you have a definition or description of what stress is to you and you're willing to share it. Just go ahead and type that in the chat box, and let's see what kinds of different responses we actually get. Things not going as planned, overwhelmed, pressure. Things that weigh heavy on my heart or my mind when I'm too drained to go on, anxious, agitated, pressure and tension, things that upset my stomach, overwhelmed with too many activities, Yeah, these are all great descriptions. And notice there's a lot of similarity with pressure and tension and anxiety, which are more of a high energy stress experience. But we also have this overwhelm or shutdown or stomach upset or physical things that are going on in our body. And so it can be very different for different people, depending on what's causing the stress, but also depending on the capacity we have to cope with that. Typically, in a more acute situation, we get that high energy stress, but if that continues for too long, it turns into that more low energy overwhelm, exhaustion, fatigue kind of experiences. And of course, life events, as Amy mentioned, such as loss of life, health issues, divorce, depression, all of that kind of stuff. And now I'm starting to feel a little bit depressed and stressed myself thinking about all of these things, but we know that that's part of life. But all of these ideas here are really the symptoms of stress. Life events could be stressful, and that might be the stimulus, but most of what we think about with stress are how we actually experience the stress itself. So what we know about how stress tends to show up at work, difficulty concentrating, and I hear someone's off mute again, so just a reminder, you might want to check your sound there, or if we have an admin, they can mute that person. Thank you. Difficulty concentrating, taking longer to do a task, difficulty thinking, reasoning, deciding, putting off challenging work. This happens to be my go-to. Difficulty juggling tasks or prioritizing, and fatigue. So 6 different very common ways that people experience stress in the workplace. And usually there's at least 1 or 2 people who would say, I've got all 6 of those. I'm not going to ask you to out yourself, but it's very common to have these types of experiences. And what we know is it's not so much the stress that we're under, but the capacity to cope with the stress, the ability to be flexible and navigate and think logically and think rationally and problem solve. But it's very difficult to do when we have an empty tank. So what I like to do in thinking about what stress actually is to get really clear on a simple definition. And I believe that stress is what happens when demand exceeds capacity. So if you look at this graph here, you'll see demand in green, capacity in orange. They tend to kind of hang out near each other until it hits a certain point where stress is increasing, demand is increasing, and we no longer have the capacity, the energy that we need to be able to cope with that. So in the moment that stress is initiated, it's actually a positive thing. So we want to have a stress response. We want to have adrenaline and even cortisol, which we know can be really toxic long-term. We need that within that short-term time frame in order to have the energy, the focus, the attention, all of that kind of stuff to be able to navigate through it. It's really as stress continues, and it's the nagging everyday stress that really tends to cause the biggest problems. So if we were all together in a room, I would ask you to raise your hand if one of the first things you think in the morning is, I don't have enough time to get it all done. Because what I've noticed in researching, and I think I've had over 80,000 people complete a survey looking at the most common stress points, that the number one thing that people experience is feeling like there's not enough time to get it all done. And by the way, there's not. I wish I could tell you there is, but there's not. There's always more to do than what we can possibly accomplish. So here's one idea of a strategy, something that worked really well for me. When I was experiencing this, I actually took a Post-it note, put it on my computer, and it said, you will not get it all done today, deal with it. And so it was kind of a fun way to remind myself that even though naturally, intuitively, my brain's going to go straight to that point of not having enough, that's the reality of the situation. So what am I going to do about it? So I kind of giggle at the fact that my brain's telling me that, but it could also be, I'm not going to get it all done today, so I need to pace myself, or I need to take more breaks, or I need to go for a walk, whatever that might be, to build that capacity. Most of the time, we can't change the demands on us. Sometimes there's something there that we might be able to delegate better or get some support with, but the capacity we have is something that usually is within our control. So as I've mentioned a few times, everything in life oscillates, from brain waves to blood sugar, blood pressure, all of that kind of stuff oscillates. And so we want to make sure to try to have a healthy rhythm. Unfortunately, most people get up and go and go and go and go and go and go and go, and then have a hard time falling asleep at night. So if you feel tired and wired at the end of the day, that's very common. That's typically happening because we're kicking out stress hormones all day to keep our energy high enough to do the work, to be with our families, whatever might be happening in our life outside of work. But then the cortisol and the stress hormones are still there. They're still elevated as we're trying to go to sleep, which reduces our production of melatonin, which helps us sleep. And we end up in this kind of reverse pattern where we have high cortisol at night, low melatonin, and then it'll flip flop. So we're tired in the morning. We don't have the cortisol energy that we need to get up. And we also have this increased melatonin making us feel sleepy. So instead of trying to fix it by doing one thing, I'd encourage you to think about how you might oscillate a little bit better throughout the day by building in these quick recharge breaks. Okay, so a couple of things I just want to teach about the brain basics. Again, this comes from this standardized database of brain research. There's just 3 fundamental things that I think that everyone should know. And you probably already know most of these. But the first one is that the brain is primarily focused on safety. So we have 5 times more threat circuits in the brain than reward circuits. We have a negativity bias that's natural in everyone. Some people have developed that even more and are more sensitive to negative stimulation because of childhood experiences or even genetically based situations. Happy to talk more about that, but if you feel like you're one of those people that tend to take on everyone else's energy, you might be more highly sensitive. There's some great research out there looking at specifically about 15 to 20% of the population that's highly sensitive. And there's really nothing different that you need to do, or I should say we need to do. I happen to be one of those people. Other than we have to be more careful. We have to really, really make sure that we recharge, set healthy boundaries. The good news is if you're highly sensitive, that you also have a positive adaptability when it comes to positive things. So music, nature, animals, things like that, aromatherapy, all of those types of things will actually have an even stronger effect on you if you make sure to include them into your routine. So the brain is focused on safety. We have 2 modes of processing, conscious and non-conscious. And our non-conscious processing is about 95% of what the brain is focusing on. And so I always think it's important to consider this because a lot of times there's things in our environment that are actually causing stimulation and stress to the brain that can limit our ability to really focus and pay attention. So right at this moment, if I were to really pay attention, it's really cold in this room, which I typically like, but I can notice that if I pay attention to it, it's something that my brain and actually even my body is getting tight and tense because of that. And that would be something that I'd want to obviously control because it's within my control. But sometimes there's other things. If we have natural light, if we're able to see the doorway, so the doorway's not behind us, little things like that can actually be pulling on your brain's attention and oftentimes can be within our control. We also want to be mindful of the fact that other people are also experiencing those types of cues from us. And so we can prime positive, we can prime gratitude, we can prime humor as a way to help people really calm down the nervous system and be more effective. And then the third one, and this is actually one of my favorites, is understanding that energy and information flow primarily from the bottom to the top of the brain. And so this is a very basic concept that I still like. It's not exact. It's not like you have these 3 very different sections of the brain because they interact. But we often call this the triune brain model. So we have at the base of the brain our most instinctual processing, our reactive processing, our survival state. In the middle of the brain is our more emotional functioning, whether we feel cared for, whether we feel emotionally safe in a situation. And then at the top is the executive functioning where we really learn and process and make judgments. And why I think this is so important is often we're getting triggered in the base of the brain through our sensory experiences, or even that emotional part of the brain. And so if you could picture almost like a filter or a funnel working upward, trying to get to the top of the brain that says, here's what I think I should do, here's my judgment, or here's how I want to collaborate with somebody. We can't do that if we're getting essentially hijacked in those lower level states. So if we think about how to recharge the brain, it's important that we also work from the bottom to the top. So we want to recharge with things like breathing, sensory cues, tactical things that we can use. I actually have this little stress monkey, and if you squeeze him, his heart pops out. And I always keep this guy with me when I'm presenting as a reminder or a cue, and I can actually just keep it in my hand if I want to. There's a tactical kind of safety effect that happens there so that I can start to move that energy through if I'm feeling anxious or stressed. So I'd like to show you a quick video that I think really highlights this. I'm going to show the video next. There is sound, and the sound is really important. So I can see my chat here, and I want to make sure that the sound is working. So when I start the video, if someone can just let me know if the sound is working or not. If it's not working, I'll be able to close it and bring it back up and make sure that the sound is working. Okay, so here we go. Okay, great. I'm so glad that the sound was working there for you all. So take a moment and chat and let me know what you found interesting about that particular video, if you found anything interesting about that particular video. Yeah, I have chills. Every time I watch that, I get a little chill bumps. Couldn't focus on anything during the first music. Stressful versus calming. Sound was soothing, pictures weren't. Yeah. Sound either creates stress or relieves it. It's a different feeling with music. Music made all of the difference. So the first time I saw this, it was so impactful for me, especially growing up with an anxiety disorder. I actually have a condition called vasovagal syndrome that's anxiety induced. So essentially I have like an opposite stress effect. So most people have like heart palpitations and my blood vessels dilate. So I end up fainting, and had a fainting disorder when I was it's not funny, but I had a fainting disorder when I was a child. So I share that because so much I feel like of my life experience has been that first video, especially since my two biggest fears are public speaking and flying. I hear a lot of that chaotic sound in my head. And it's amazing what the sound actually does. So again, that's a sensory cue that you are getting that changes. And if we monitored what you were watching, you probably noticed different things in the first video than the second. It's almost like the sound, the chaotic sound has you looking at chaotic things, and the harmonious sound has you looking at harmonious things. And yeah, that having music that we listen to help us focus can be very calming. I listened to a song this morning, just, getting up early and wanting to be at my best for you all. This morning, I listened to a song that is just light and reminds me about how good life is and the opportunities that I have in my life. And so the music can feel really helpful that way. And similarly, aromatherapy can do that. Colors can do that. And we can try to incorporate more of those things intentionally, and also be aware of the chaotic things that sometimes are in our actual environment, or are just kind of happening in our head. The internal dialogue that's happening in our head can have a real impact on what we actually can see. So as I mentioned in the beginning, if stress is what happens when demand exceeds capacity, I mentioned that acute stress or short-term stress can actually be really helpful. So we want to actually have some stress. We want to have challenges. The issue is when it becomes chronic or when it starts to feel like it's a threat to our system. So research has shown that 75 to 90% of medical visits are actually stress related. And those tend to be those chronic types of situations where cortisol is increased, cardiovascular stress, we store more fat in our abdominal area as a protective mechanism for our internal organs, immune function goes down. I mean, there's all sorts of things that happen negatively for stress, but it's not typically those short-term, I have to fix it, I have to do something with it right now, because that gets mobilized. It's really that energy that gets pushed down or pushed away that starts to become toxic to our system. And I see a note here about a link to the video. Yes, you can get a link to the video, and I'll tell you an easy way to look it up. If you look up my name, Heidi Hanna, and then type in see what you feel. I think that's how I have it labeled. You should be able to get that, but if not, certainly send me an email and I can send it to you. Happy to do that. I think that just does such a good job of illustrating what it is that we're talking about here. Okay, so one other thing I just want to share before we start talking about coping strategies is that over time, chronic stress will rewire and essentially remodel our nervous system. And this is so fascinating to me. A dear friend and colleague who unfortunately passed away a couple of years ago, Dr. Bruce McEwen, did a lot of this work. And I highly suggest, if you're interested in any of this, that you take a look at his work. He's got a lot of great videos online, books, all sorts of things, if you want to get like really into the science of it and the neuroscience of it. But essentially what happens is we start to atrophy certain parts of the brain. So again, that human part, the prefrontal cortex, the hippocampus responsible for memory and learning, both of those actually start to atrophy, kind of like muscles that aren't being used. So we often say the brain is like a muscle. It's actually not a muscle, but it's like a muscle in the sense that it can strengthen certain connections. And we can actually cause the neurogenesis, which is actually the development of new brain cells. So we can cause neurogenesis, which is new brain cells. We can strengthen the connection between the cells, and we can increase essentially the glue that works between them in the neurochemistry. But what happens in chronic stress is this remodeling. So we lose the parts of our brain that really help us to problem solve, to collaborate, to get along well with each other. And then the amygdala will actually hypertrophy or grow in strength and size so that we're overreactive to things. And this just kind of flashed into my mind as I'm talking about all of this not talking about it for the first time, but first time I thought about this is things like road rage that we see with people, and just how I just feel like a lot of people are walking around just like really angry and reactive. And part of that is because of this remodeling process that happens that people don't realize. And some of us do realize, where we start feeling like we're not really ourselves, if we're feeling agitated or irritable or aggressive, and that's not really who we are as a person. A lot of that is because our brain is starting to take over and act in these particular ways because of this remodeling. But the good news is, we can shift it. So we can increase focus and attention to the prefrontal cortex through things like meditation, physical exercise. We can improve that hippocampus by relaxation exercises, and with the amygdala calming that down. And most of the techniques will do a little bit of both. So things like breathing meditations or moving meditations. Physical exercise is one of the best things we can do. And it's actually one of the only ways to actually stimulate the development of new brain cells is through cardiovascular exercise. Learning a new language or learning something new can help that as well. We've also mentioned music. I happen to be a huge aromatherapy fan. So lots of different scents that we can use that will either lift our focus and attention or kind of calm us down. An example of that would be things like peppermint is amazing for increasing focus and attention. And you can actually put a little bit on your forehead to get a little bit of a physical sensation. You just want to be really careful with peppermint that you don't get it in your eye. I made that mistake once right before a virtual presentation and I couldn't stop crying. So be careful with those things. But you can also use calming things like vanilla or chamomile or lavender, which will really help to kind of soften the overactivity that you might be feeling. And lots of great research on aromatherapy for you. Okay, just checking chat. Looks like we're all good. Yes, and as a reminder, we will have a video of this session as well. Okay, so what do we do about this? If we understand that the brain works in this way, safety first, bottom to the top, then we can train ourselves specifically using these 3 basic steps. Now, I call it a brain recharge process because for a lot of people, they're a bit allergic or hesitant to do meditation. I think the main reason is it just either feels too hard, too overwhelming, too spiritual, takes too long, whatever the reason is, or they've tried it and it didn't work for them. And essentially, these are just kind of the 3 fundamental things we go through in most types of meditation, if it's more of a kind of focused meditation. So if you've done mindfulness meditation, you're really just being mindful of your experience without judging your experience. And so it's kind of a chance to just notice and practice noticing without having any sort of reaction. But that can also be really hard without some sort of guidance. Like if you're listening to something guide you through that process, it becomes a lot easier. This is more of a focus meditation, which means that you're going to try to take yourself from where you are now to a new state of mind or a new state of being. So we use the breath first and focusing on our breathing in order to calm the nervous system down. And studies have shown that breathing in and out to a count of about 5 is optimal for most people. Doesn't mean it works for everybody, but it's a good starting point. The research also shows that exhaling a little bit longer than you inhale will reduce anxiety even more. And the reason for that is when we exhale, we trigger the relaxation response. When we inhale, we actually trigger the stress response a little bit. So it's that back and forth. So if you're feeling stressed and you take a nice deep breath, that can actually overstimulate or overexcite you. But if you take a nice long exhale, that actually should start to relax you. So I tend to do about 4 to 5 seconds in and about 5 to 6 seconds out and starting to get into that nice, healthy rhythm. But you can also just notice your breath and just get into a comfortable, relaxed breathing pace. You don't have to be super specific about the time that you're using. There's also some tools that can help you with actually training a little bit of a better breathing process. A lot of the apps that are out there, and I'm sure Rhonda knows a bunch of the best ones that she can share with you, but a lot of those have breathing bars or tools that you can look at to improve your breathing pace. And then, and I see a couple questions coming up here, so I'm going to get to those in just a moment here. Keep them coming though. Don't feel bad typing questions, and I promise I'll get to them. So once we get into that calm breathing state, then we're going to move into a positive feeling. So gratitude, as we started with, is one of the quickest and most powerful ways to shift our feeling sensation. But it could also be humor or joy or play. Anything that really feels positive starts to actually change like 1,400 different things that are happening in our body for the better. So we get a lot of good chemical stimulation through those positive feelings of things like gratitude. And then I like to, and you can just stop there if you want, you can just breathe and feel and just kind of hang out in that lovely space. I like to actually move to the third one, which is to focus on how I want to feel, how I want to show up. And an easy way to do that is to think about a word or phrase that describes you when you're at your best, and just allow yourself to feel that way right now intentionally and practice feeling that way so you can get into that state on purpose, essentially. So I want to walk us through this, and we'll just take about a minute or two to do this. But again, I'm going to ask you to close your eyes. and just get into a comfortable position. There's no perfect way to do that, so don't worry too much. We always recommend that you have a straight back, but that could be sitting up or lying down. I tend to do most of my meditation lying down because I just feel more supported that way, so you can certainly do it that way as well. So with your eyes closed, just start to bring your attention to your breath and notice how it feels to breathe. Notice as your chest expands and contracts. And if you feel any tension, especially in your neck, your back, or your shoulders, you can go ahead and just move those around a little bit. See if you can get your body to relax. Let gravity pull you down into the chair. And just continue to focus on your breathing. Maybe exhaling just a little bit longer than you inhale. Letting go, letting your body relax. And now I want you to think about something or someone that you feel grateful for or that you appreciate. And if you're thinking about it and you notice that your energy is kind of up in the top of your head, see if you can pull that down into your body. I like to picture like a little white light of gratitude starting in my mind as I'm thinking about it, and then slowly bringing that down into the space around my heart and allowing myself to really feel gratitude in my body. And if your mind starts to wander at any point, just know that that's totally natural. Just notice that it's happening. Bring your attention back to your breath, back to the feeling of gratitude. And then for the last step, I want you to think about a word or phrase that describes you when you're at your best. So if you were going to show up today as your best self, what would that look like? What would that feel like? And see if you can kind of shift into that state of being right now for the next few moments. Take a couple more nice, relaxing breaths. And then when you feel ready, you can go ahead and open your eyes. So I would love to have some people share, if you're willing to, in chat. What was the word or phrase that describes you at your best? What was that kind of energy state that you wanted to move yourself into? Light. I love that, Catherine. That was one of the songs I was listening to. There's a great song by India Ari called I Am Light. It's like a meditation. It's one of the ones I listened to this morning. Carefree, happy, joyful, empowered, peaceful, content, enthusiastic, caring, kind. Love it. Thank you. Balanced, beautiful, peaceful, radiant. Awesome. So with this then, it gives us a chance to kind of commit to wanting to be in this space. And it also gives us an anchor word. So you can write it down in your notes and come back to it later when you take a break, maybe when you get some food or have a green tea or whatever it might be. Just think about that. And instead of just thinking about it logically, see if you can really pull that down and start to embody that experience in your body. And this is something we can keep going back to. So we have just a few minutes left, and I want to make sure that we end on time and also keep a little time if there are any more questions. And so one of the things I like to think about is how we actually become the boss of our own brain instead of our brain getting hijacked and kind of running away from us. And so there's 3 simple steps. Number 1, to plug into something in the morning. before you check email, before you watch the news or whatever your typical routine is, hopefully you're doing something that's nourishing and recharging for you. Something like this anchor word where you really like listen to a song and think about how you want to show up before you check your email or before you start kind of putting out energy. Our brain is most flexible and adaptable first thing in the morning. So it's super important that we feed our brains with good information, not just good nutrition. We want the nutrition too, but good information and good nutrition even better. We want to make sure to unplug in the evening. So some sort of ritual in the evening, not just technology unplugging, but unplugging from the noise in our mind. So having something, could be taking a bath or a shower, going for a walk, listening to some music, watching something funny, a lot of different things that you can do. And I've got some examples on a recharge handout that I'm going to share with you here in just a moment of some different ideas of what you might want to add into your unplug routine, as well as your recharge. So your recharge are consistent shifts throughout the day, maybe 3 to 5 minutes. Ideally, it would be every hour, taking 3 to 5 minutes, but I know realistically, most of us can't quite schedule ourselves that way, depending on the type of role that you're in. So if you can do it every hour, great. If you can make your hour-long meetings or, tasks 50 minutes and really try to get into the routine of managing a little bit less time so that you have greater energy, that will be really helpful for you as well. And of course, the biggest thing is actually having a plan and tracking it, having accountability. If there's somebody you could share this with, maybe you have a recharge buddy that you just say, hey, for 7 days, let's just check in with each other and make sure that we're actually, doing these things and incorporating them. So this is the handout I sent to Rhonda that she'll share with all of you. And it's just a very basic training log to be able to jot down what are you going to do and check off when you get them done. Ideally, plugging in and unplugging the bookends of the day, plus 3 at least recharge breaks during the day. And at the bottom of that, you'll also see my recharge toolkit, which is a website. It's free. It's kind of built like a course, but it's not a course. And I don't email you and like harass you or anything like that, because that stresses me out. So it just has access. I think this handout is there as well. There's also a couple little lessons in there that you can use or share however you see fit. And just a couple things I thought I would share. If you are working with a team or in an organization where you want to start to implement these types of things, is to really prioritize energy over time. We have to prioritize time, but time without energy is void of value. So doing these little shifts to recharge the brain is going to make us more effective. Minimize multitasking. I know we all know that this is not a healthy thing for the brain. It actually causes a lot of stress and kills brain cells. I always tell people that multitasking kills brain cells and there's no way around it. So try to minimize it. Prime positive, start with gratitude. Ask people what they found funny today, or to tell, a silly story or whatever that might look like is going to help the brain. Celebrate small wins. I don't think we take enough time to do this. If you just have one ritual that you're going to add, really celebrate the fact that you're staying consistent with that. And then my favorite, build your mirth muscle, which is essentially your humor. The more you put in intentional strategic humor into the day, the more you're going to be able to be cognitively flexible. And there's tons of great research on the benefits of humor for our health and our performance. I do a whole presentation just on humor as well, because I think it's something that we all could use a little bit more. So with that, before I close, I'm going to give you one chance to do a quick recharge before we end the session here together. And by the way, if you have questions, feel free to type those in the chat box now. Okay. I love that. I've seen it so many times, but I absolutely love it. If you want to find that video, you can go on YouTube and just look up baby laughing, ripping paper, and it's pretty easy to find. Again, just like 30 seconds, but changes the energy, lightens the mood. Humor is universal language. So I hope that was helpful for all of you. And thank you for being here. If there are more questions, I know I'm going to turn over to Rhonda here in a moment, but if there are more questions, please do feel free to email me. I'd love to keep in touch and support you however I can.